Okay, yeah, I just want to include some other information. It's kind of like when I like think about alphanumerics and linguistic alphanumerics. I focus a lot on like a lot of songs, and right now it's kind of like it seems to be kind of like Where's the Motown and Jet Magazine and all this. It's kind of like I've been thinking about like Elton John, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and it seemed to be like something in my mind, almost like the song Benny and the Jets. She has electric boots, and I just don't want to just like continually go off into a direction based upon experience, but it kind of seemed to be the compatibility would like between Elton John and like Paul McCartney and the Wings, and the song Somebody's Knocking at the Door, and that word antigen, the thing about oncology involving bone marrow and causing in turn the immune system to kick in the immunoglobulin, producing an overabundant amount of white cells, and in turn creating an issue likewise with like men normally based upon years of it and what low voltage and exposure is as compared to the normal perception of like oncology during like cancer treatment and chemotherapy and exposure to like MRIs and CAT scans and the radiation as well as like chemotherapy itself, and just exposure with oncology. Yet many people's perception when amyloidosis is ever brought up, and I did my own homework, hopefully originating because both my mother and father both had cancer, okay, and I took care of them like good, and it's kind of like a solid 2 years with like my mother, and then like there was like I think maybe a 4 or 5 year period, and then my father had it too, and like I spent close to, I think it was like close to 3 years with my father nonstop day and night. It's like a total of 5 years, okay, but I was like with him throughout the entire during the chemotherapy and all the way through hospice, and them deciding to go ahead and spend their final days here at the home. Well, anyway, so like I was kind of like thinking about something about like all this information and the compatibility of like analytical with like linguistic alphanumerics, and it seemed to be like right now I'm kind of like thinking about like Elton John and think about Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. It's almost like like Where's Motown and Jet Magazine and all this, and it's kind of like it gets also to the Benny and the Jets. It's kind of like now it's kind of like it has some similarities. Likewise, in addition with like Safari browser, and on the analytical, what amyloidosis is like an exposure that actually is sometimes identified as the immune system combating cancer, sometimes misconceived as not really the issue, but just exposure, whether it's involving oncology, or like not, completely not at all. What low voltage is as compared to like an overabundant amount of X-rays or CAT scans or MRIs, or what type of isotope and contrast, or all the intensity and duration, all the way what normally sometimes gets into stage 4 cancer, and the exposure and how much, and because likewise the exposure during trying to combat it would be normally the body's immune system, normally the white blood cell combating it as a natural thing as compared to the treatment and finding and locating it within the body and anatomy and all the exposure and everything involved with it. Okay, but the thing with this is that it's kind of like saying about like an Elton John song, Benny and the Jets. It's kind of like she has electric boots, and amyloidosis, that's cause it is centrifuge. I read it in a better bubble. Echo boost, teleprompting, speed reader, laser beam, Benny and the Jets. And it's kind of like the reason sometimes I kind of like do that just within myself. It's kind of like a combination of things, just like what's going on, but it almost seems that some of the analytical side, not that it has to involve alphanumerics, but probably at a minimum like proper English numerical composition, and ultimately probably alphanumerics. It's almost like the thing about like W television actually being, instead of a W, 2 V's, a V and a V, and proper English numerical composition being a VP and a VP, because one P visible and pronounced and one P visible and silent. It's kind of like W network of a PG-13 rating, as a vice president network. The W is really a VP, and a VP that some people might not even think of like 9-hole golf courses or leases as grant or student loan combined with a Pell Grant, or what, you know, in real estate would be termed as maybe some idea of appreciation as retrospective, like, you know, depreciation, annuity or non-taxable as compared to a prepaid tax, and you know, the cost of living and all this analytical stuff that places, you know, direction and value, and you know, something about leases as grant that presents like an ongoing combating issue, almost like oncology and cancer, and appreciation, depreciation in anatomy, and the factors that are involved in litigation, tobacco, risk of habeas corpus, and a deed restriction involving, you know, certain information that seems to be, you know, involving television programming or auditing legal media as compared to the thought of maybe deposition only being the thought of post-production, or maybe something other than, you know, live auditing as compared to, you know, post-production with the thought of maybe even a deposition as potential as post-production as potential of maybe editing. I mean, if the word's not patent, well, then it's obviously loss prevention. The deal about people's perception of loss prevention doesn't necessarily think that maybe a degree level maybe be something that they've never heard their whole entire life because they never went that direction in international financial management, or even know how it's practiced. Certain people, when a circuit is involved, many people don't see their television as like, I mean, a circuit. And what they're seeing on television as a circuit, actually a circuit beyond television, and what they're looking at is like, it doesn't register in a lot of people's mind as, I mean, a real circuit or a deed restriction that way, based upon participation. Loss prevention would only possibly mean stay where you are and not going to leave, and some idea of like national security. The only thing about national security is, you know, I mean, is it really the issue of really maintaining, you know, some idea of 1,000 years of peace in Zion, and, you know, Grover Cleveland on a $1,000 bill as compared to some idea of like, you know, Social Security only representative normally not even recognized as loss prevention of non-degree participation, and automatically, you know, now in my mind it's automatically, you know, think about monetary and domestic aggregates of neighborhoods, and not the real issue of commercial venue, of living quarter, with everything, you know, beyond, you know, like 110 volts, normally involving like residential areas as compared to, you know, at a minimum, you know, it seemed to be the acronyms of, you know, like HOA, Homeowners Association, and even the Washington Post, the WP, representing a legal media deposition of the Washington Post itself, Washington being 30 like television, automatically legal media, and Post, you know, the thing about, you know, deposition seemed to be, you know, like a thing of the past in history, or the thought of potentially, the thought of post-production only representing some idea, you know, post-production as editing, not considered a breach, maybe loss prevention as, well, it's not a U.S. patent kind of attitude about what loss prevention is in constitutional law, or what having fair use, or, you know, I mean, what is enforced as compared to, you know, what is accepted as, you know, available. I wouldn't use the word version for the mere sake of, like, maybe not realizing authenticity maybe be misperceived as an automatic and not questioned as integrity. And, you know, who knows anyway for them. You know, the thing is, it seems to be that constitutional law is so very much about, you know, hey, freedom of speech and freedom of press. Yet at the same time, where's all the, you know, U.S. patent thing about, you know, what seems to be the gross national product side of, like, it's really not an option, or a deed restriction affected by television programming, in my mind, automatically. A commercial venue, a living quarter with a minimum of 240 volts that seem that the whole HOA and GMAC of, like, promissory notes and IEE of International Electronic Engineering provide as an acronym, all being 24. It seemed to be the IEE and the big O about the organization, and the O being 15, or a 0, or even the degree, you know, representative of exponential quotients of powers of multiplication, or, you know, even the equator, that way of 0 degree. But the thing is that ultimately, you know, it gets to, you know, 24 with, like, the O being a 0 and 240. at a commercial venue having all appliances of 240 and beyond, the thought of what would normally at the most in residential 220. It's the lesser than 240, which is like the very minimum in my mind of like a commercial venue of living quarters and a whole different television network beyond, W television, or the thought of proper English numerical composition as the W being two V's and the VP and the VP, based upon, the P being visible and pronounced and the P being visible and silent, that representative of the R itself, like between the county and the country that way, and even the kernel, and the Ajax language presenting the black and white issue, similarly of Univision, the three pastels in the black and three pastels in the white. It seemed to be the thing of the potential of like, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and the acronym being, F being like ABC or 6 likewise alphabetically being 52, and the VPN, the Vice President Network, and the C and the C being like the three pastels, but between the three pastels in the black and the three pastels in white. It seemed to be that Univision presents maybe a duration. I'm actually trying to grasp the capacity of something about a Stargate program. In my mind, it's like a 6 month to a 9 month period that there's a period of Geneva and the summit meetings being involved in different locations during, predominantly in like 1994, 95, and 1996. It seemed to be the most intense, seemingly of, the kernel in the way of Abraham Lincoln night vision, shadow government Stargate program. And the thing with this, it seemed to be the intensity of, certain factors involving like a retroactive future, involving, certain factors, and even the color code of the Air Force One of the White House presented as, in my mind, automatically the acronym of Foreign Bureau Interrogation as compared to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the idea of like a Foreign Bureau Intelligence identifying the Midnight Blue, predominantly of 1995, really in my mind, automatically the World Trade Center of 9/11, September 11th, 1995, and the 6-year period between 1995 to 2001, and the difference between a Vice President network and not a Vice President network, and the real deal about, presidents and corporate executive officers, and, not necessarily the thought of importing and exporting as immigration custom enforcement, but still in my mind at a degree level it seems to be the thing about method banking involving importing and exporting, and securities and annuities network as compared to storage area network. But anyway, yeah, so like the real, okay, what I really started to talk about is, think about Elton John, okay, and the Benny and the Jets. It seemed to be in my mind, involving, the thing about, Sarbanes-Oxley, financial instruments and stock compliance representative automatically in my mind of like, Chicago White Sox and the Boston Red Sox, yet two cities with major 12-footer reserve banks, okay? But somewhere in Sarbanes-Oxley financial instruments of stock compliance, I mean, it automatically in my mind seemed to be, now involving, the red and white blood cell. But the thing with this is, it's almost like in my mind, it's like an Elton John song, Been in the Jets, and a little bit of analytical about the, she has electric booze and aiming low doses, viscosity, centrifuge. I read it in a better bubble. Echo boost, teleprompting, speed reader, laser beam. Oh, Benny and the Jets. And I mean, it really seems to be, I mean, just that. And it's kind of like, almost in my mind, it's kind of like, where's like Motown and J Magazine and all this, right? And then it seemed to be like, likewise, that Wilson Phillips song, hey, you're falling like a wing from the sky. I thought that things would never change. And that song over and over, okay? But I mean, I've heard certain factors of like, My Name Wade and difference, throughout my years, okay? It's kind of like caught my attention in a way, and I'm kind of like thinking about it right now because something about, Elton John and that and it's kind of like I was thinking about it because the Diners Club in Quantum being the Alphabet 107. I'm actually on County Road 107. I think every street out here is considered County Road 107. When I first actually got here in this neighborhood, like in 1978 December, it's like a rural route in County Road 107C. Then it's kind of like where'd the C go, and this 107, and then I think every road is considered a County Road 107. Then 107A, then I think G, 107G. I think there's either 7 or 8 County Road 107's out here. One just the numeric of 107, and then it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I think. Anyway, this is actually 3611 Mona Street, Pearland, Texas, 77584. But the thing with this is kind of like, I was thinking about the Elton John thing about that. Because both my mother and father both had, cancer, okay? The thing with this is that throughout all the treatment, which was predominantly, my mother having it for like 2 years and actually passed away on President Barack Obama's inauguration, January 21st. In any case, so like I think it's like 5 years later, my father got cancer, and it was like a 3-month period. I mean, nonstop, day and night. I had like a total of 5 years for like a nonstop between my mother and father. So I kind of like became familiar with like terminology and procedures and kind of like what's going on, with the immune system. But the similarities of exposure was an experience of mine that actually led to like 911 calls. Having to go to the emergency room, be admitted as congestive heart failure, and I didn't really believe anything about it, okay? But the whole point is that it got to the point of me doing my own homework and the similarities of circulation, and actually even the circulation involving the idea of like amyloidosis and overabundant amount of white blood cells being produced, actually clogging capillary tubes. And it seemed to be really the first place it actually starts happening in a guy in anatomy is like where it matters in relation, okay? Ultimately, some idea of like going to urology and endocrinology, and similarities of what the pituitary gland does, as some idea of like affecting hormones. Likewise, the body properly, presenting itself as a factor, regulating, what's supposed to be as far as circulation goes, became the issue. Been to urology about that, okay? The circulation issue. And it should have been really the first thing I'd heard. And even when I mentioned it, I mean, it's like automatically not going to be talked about. The same as with amyloidosis. But the thing is that there's like a 16-month period, okay? The 15th month is the only month that I did not have to go through and call AR. Repeatedly, they were referring to congestive heart failure. I knew it was circulation. All that congestive stuff was anything other than the medication being prescribed was actually causing it. So like I quit taking it, okay? I knew it was circulation, and automatically, knowing that heparin being blood thinner, normally like a regulating factor during treatment of cancer anyway, for, blood count, as compared to, having the right blood count for like infusion with chemotherapy and making sure that the body can handle it and it'll be safe. And not, rule itself and, cancel itself out based upon the rejuvenation of the white blood cell in the body, recouping for a period, to have a very productive, like an infusion that way with chemotherapy. And, anyway, so like, I became familiar with that, okay? And ultimately, amyloidosis really wasn't the word during either one of my parents' chemotherapy treatment. It became, an interest of mine, but only because I was going through ER, like, almost like it looked like a schedule, like willingly and knowingly participating, like an increment during a 16-month period, like once a month. As ridiculous as it seemed, as almost insulting as it did ridiculously seem, like a schedule. Oh yeah, it really wasn't that, it was just really happening that way, okay? And repeatedly, they were throwing at, congestive heart failure. Wasn't really it at all, other than the medication that was being prescribed. The thing is that amyloidosis is really the real issue involving the circulation. And that alone would cause, maybe the buildup of other fluid, based upon, just like, breathing air and normal, like, oxygen transferring, through the tissue, the lung, into the bloodstream, like every breath, and the way it's really supposed to be anyway. The thing with this is that the circulation became the issue. I mean, years before, like any of this, and realized that, that should have been one of the first things I should have heard, like in the urologist's office, about circulation, about, where it really matters in relation, okay? The thing with this is that when I didn't hear that, and I, like, confronted the urologist and endocrinologist with all that information, they acted like they'd never heard anything like that, like, on this planet. And then I knew that they themselves were not on the right planet, or in the right classroom. Yeah. Are you sure you were ever in the right class? Why are you on this planet? Yeah, so like anyway, so like it really got to, you know, really that in neurology and endocrinology, likewise with the cardiologist, ultimately resulting in some idea of similarities that led to like even mesothelioma. You know, the information led, you know, all the way through a procedure, an ablation and ablation, and the pronunciation in the AOL thing about America Online or Apple or Oracle, and the pronunciation of ablation or oblation, one being like an act of God, ultimately analytically, based upon its description, in alphanumeric 71 in Paraland, yet the other was like involving ablation is a procedure that's supposed to be controlling like arrhythmia and atrial fibrillation, and all the neurosensory side, as well as, you know, the factors are like, you know, cardiopulmonary, and proper, you know, blood flow and blood circulation and air, and the aorta, and, you know, the cardiopulmonary side, as well as the neurosensory side, and the difference between like arrhythmia and atrial fibrillation. It had ultimately been suggested that an ablation would be recommended, and the way it was described, okay, is that they presented it as like, you know, that there's like a nerve that needed to be like cut, yet there was like 3 layers to create a bag, and it had to be cut to release the fluid, and the way it was all being prescribed as a procedure, that it would be, you know, like, but it was presented in like 3 different approaches that led to the similarities of a pericardium. And, you know, all this information, even the similarities of congestive, what would be even including amyloidosis as compared to congestive heart failure, led to the idea of a pericardium. And all the information, the similarities, I mean even mesothelioma, and the similarities likewise, and in turn leading to an apparatus that would be some idea like based upon inhalation of toxicology of, you know, like what would be maybe like smoke inhalation during, you know, like a fire, and exposed to, you know, conditions that might be like a chemical burn in the lungs. It seemed to be like what's going on like right now, and all this information, I mean, none of it really being compatible on any kind of professional level other than confusion and a bunch of crap that I wasn't going to put up with. But, you know, likewise, I'd like signed it. I mean, I went there and attempted, because I was actually basing my so-called, like, I don't know if I'd call it ignorance or maybe just wishful thinking of like what only good faith might mean as maybe business law, not necessarily a medical profession, based upon what was going on like in while I was experiencing this certain situation. But in any case, okay, the way it was being led, and the belief like if all the procedures were combined at once, it would be like a heart transplant. And I was kind of like thinking about that. It's kind of like a heart transplant, and they were like combining all this information at different times, different days, different weeks, different months, and it's kind of like not finding it hard to believe that it was all separated, and, you know, it's like now it's in the, so call now, and it's all combined. Are you both talking about a heart transplant? Call now, toll-free 1-800 number, and you're going to say like, well, you know, I guess you told me so. Or it's like, well, you really knew all along. So like anyway, so like that was like not funny, but the thing about mesothelioma, in reality, it's like fluid that they were not identifying as mesothelioma about the tissues involving an ablation, and were identifying it as mesothelioma, and that is mesothelioma about being fluid trapped in between the layers of the skin of the bronchi and the lung itself, and the transfer being allowed, you know, like, you know, oxygen transfer into the tissue of the lungs into the bloodstream, but there's like 2 layers, and fluid gets trapped in it, and it creates like an unreal, I mean, non-stop cough, I mean, day and night, and it wouldn't even identify as mesothelioma with me, but I mean, I actually experienced something like that. I mean, for 3 months, I mean, non-stop, day and night. I mean, unreal non-stop. It's, I mean, so like that was like not cool. My ribs cramping, and I mean, my cartilage in between my ribs are cramping. I mean, for real. I mean, I had to cough so much that even my lower legs and groin areas, I mean, cramping from coughing so much. I mean, but anyway, so like mesothelioma, it presented the tissue factor that seemed to be the similarities of like even toxicology of smoke inhalation in apparatus that actually based upon a chemical burn, expanding the inside of the bronchi to keep it from collapsing based upon being exposed to smoke inhalation. And none of this information was even discussed in any kind of way other than, you know, it not being presented the way what is ultimately what I'm talking about now. It seems to be an issue, like even a remote control, controlling some idea of like what's inside my body, okay? So like anyway, so like there's something about that, and the similarities of like something about toxicology and something placed inside the bronchi to expand to keep it from collapsing because of smoke inhalation and exposure to, you know, toxicology and chemicals that, you know, damage the tissue. And it's obviously something about that, but not one word has been discussed about, I mean, not any of it. Okay, so like automatically it's not cool, yet the apparatus that seemed to be like some idea of like expanding, keeping the bronchial open, has presented the issue of remote and actually expanding to the point of, you know, being inside and actually, and still like none of this was discussed. It's just like happening, okay? And not one word, I mean for real, okay? So like any case, so like all that's like, it's like really not cool, okay? So the thing that's going on is saying that with the apparatus presenting what would be mesothelioma, that was not discussed, and now it's like presenting the same principle of like an apparatus used in toxicology as an apparatus to keep the lungs from collapsing based upon smoke inhalation or exposure to chemicals in the air, presents the same similarities of mesothelioma and fluid getting trapped between that and the lung itself, and still the same similarities, almost the same in description based upon just talking to a person. Not really distinguishing the difference. A person would actually believe what they're listening to and sound like they know what they're talking about. And like professional doctors like know that, okay? I mean, and the person not realizing it sound like they're all in agreement, like they know everything, and not even have a clue to the connectivity of that they're a total idiot believing what they're hearing. And it sounds like everything they're saying is like a professional level and degree level, and that they know what they're talking about. It's just that they're not telling you. You don't realize what the connectivity is and what's really going on, and you're a total freaking idiot. That's really what's going on, okay? So like that's going on, okay? And anyway, like I need to get like that out of my lungs, okay? And have a normal day. Okay, like I'm a drummer, okay? I like singing and not have the idea of combating some like, you know, allergists defining the meaning of like, you know, dietitians, you know, serving, you know, some idea like Abraham Lincoln night vision, some idea the colonel, the signature of a deed restriction is only a K9 unit for K television, or some idea of like a international financial management representing some idea of like intellectual property. It's like international law of having fair use as an easement as a royalty generating, you know, factor of a participating accuracy of a hood ornament, and Lincoln Continental and all that, you know, great stuff about rectangles on a tennis court, identifying some factors of a 90 degree in international banking systems, or some idea like, you know, military time is like, well, you know, well, hey, you know, figure it out, you know. So like in any case, so like, you know, finding the unknowns, kind of like algebra, it's kind of like, haven't you been to algebra? Finding the unknown. Huh. Yeah. So like in any case, so like all that's going on, a lot's going on, and it doesn't look like anything's going on. Or it looks like everyone just like, you know, everyone's like agreeing, and there's like a perception of professional witnessing. It looks like you're agreeing, and you're like not going to war, really. And like someone says that he's like been to the bank, and the word endorsement has been involved as not identified as a storage area network, or some idea of a K9 unit, and some idea like, you know, securities and annuities network, as compared to some idea of, you know, some oasis of love and a tunnel of love, and all that factor of like monopolizing capitalization and distinguishing, you know, investment terminology as human capital beyond the K9 unit, because, you know, the kernel is involved with like, you know, some idea of like, you know, proper English numerical composition, and how, you know, Fox 29 News in Philadelphia, the big W of like, you know, the way I say Fox 29 News in Philadelphia seemed to be, you know, the Elton John Philadelphia Freedom thing about what I'm talking about, and involving, you know, all this stuff about, you know, Benjamin Franklin and like Einstein and E = mc² and international electronic engineering, and Benjamin Franklin flying the kite, and a keynote, and you know all that stuff about Benjamin Franklin and just flying a kite and all that stuff about Philadelphia freedom, and Elton John it presents all this information like Fox 29 News in Philadelphia. In my mind, it's the ultimate place and location in the United States, involving W television really being the thing about a W being a V and a V and a VP and a VP in proper numerical composition, and a vice president and a vice president. Even ultimately, thought of like Ulysses S. Grant presenting a student loan combined with a Pell Grant, and some idea of like litigation de facto rich habeas corpus defining the meaning of what cost of living only means, as compared to maybe someone designating only what television programming means as a deed restriction, and like not telling you about it, and experiencing some depreciating value in relation or class or the immediate surrounding area, or what it means in relation, or some idea maybe an Oval Office, or the big deal about international financial management, and all the real thing about beyond the Easter egg basket, and even John Lennon and Yoko Ono and all that J. Edgar Hoover, the jaywalk, the amphibious thing about the Easter egg basket, after the third day resurrecting, yeah, and all that John Lennon, based upon what a baptism is, representing the resurrection. And it seemed to be that John Lennon is the clothing, and Yoko Ono is about the egg whites beyond the Easter egg basket, and the monogamous eggnog crusade, and the jaywalk, and hop sing, and J. Edgar Hoover, the amphibious thing about all that information involving beyond maritime law, and making a grade beyond like local, and internet protocol of local area network, or like maritime law, and it seemed to be likewise Univision in my mind seemed to be the thing with the acronym FCC that way, and American Idol involving Univision, and American Idol beyond American Idol thing of like moving motor vehicles. Yeah. Anyway, on a highway of like with vehicles, as compared to being amphibious for like aviation, with the Federal Communications Commission (FCC) that way. But in any case, so like all this was going on, and I was thinking about Elton John and Paul McCartney and Wings. It seemed that even like the browser Safari presents all the analyticals, what would be almost the first thought of like amyloidosis involving oncology and the immunoglobulin producing an overabundant amount of white blood cells and congesting the blood vessels and in storage area, and normally it's the capillary tubes, the capillary blood vessels, and it's not, I hadn't heard it once, and even presented it to urology and endocrinology about circulation and where it matters most in relation. Okay, some ideas like wow, it's my hood ornament sitting beyond my beltway. Who are you kidding? Okay. In any case, so like in anatomy, seemed to be really not cool about exposure and what low voltage is, as compared to like rebar and the foundation, or thought of even a diet involving some idea of like electrophysiology that creates some idea of neutrons, protons, and electrons in midair and inside, like my home getting electrocuted like midair on a neurosensory side, and obviously it involved like just buying water at Kroger here in Pearland, and likewise it seemed to be like back in the 80s of like the Houston Chronicle presenting like whole pages and involving catalysts, and even Great Expectations. It seemed to be those two were the ones that were consuming and being purchased as whole page advertisement and quarter page and 16th quarter, almost the pi r squared and E equal MC squared and percentile, of a coupon, the size of like advertisement of like a Great Expectation, which is like it ultimately leads to finally meeting the requirements of the high society on the Concord, breaking the sound barrier, and some brains about Christianity seem to be the Great Expectations thing of that advertisement. Likewise, what the deal is that the Houston Chronicles are presenting a whole bunch of ads involving catalyst on a professional level. Normally, places of employment during advertisement of like classified ads would normally present more so as places of employment involving a certain type of position, not necessarily a categorization of catalysts. Normally processing in chemical plants would be identified as a processor that does involve catalysts, but it was like everything that involved catalysts, including food, even medical terminology, internal medicine, chemical refinery. I mean, the categorization was like huge of catalysts, and it seemed to be the thing like going on like during the COVID-19 thing about it, and something like that happening just based on my consumption, just purchasing food in the Pearland, Texas area, and my thought of like what has obviously involved like the idea of foreknowledge of performance monitoring, and has led to some like real not funny thought of what seemed to be involved in my mind automatically as a categorization of money in international banking system and multinational corporations and jurisdictions, and something about some experience I've experienced that I didn't even call in the beginning, like Abraham Lincoln night vision shuttle government Stargate program. And like I said, it really, when I realized that memory had been, the biggest, hugest thing, and realizing I didn't even remember something about that. I had, 25, 30 year period had already passed. And obviously, the Stargate program being involved, that included world news and national news and certain things, a considerable, phenomenally large amount of YouTube was on it. The thing with this is that reactivating a memory was like really a Microsoft screensaver. And once again, Europe's most wealthiest museum. In my mind, it's like a museum for like dead people. The thing with this is it's identified as a museum, but not necessarily a funeral home for dead people, as a museum for dead people. But that was my first thought, really, anyway, when I was looking at it. And I remember being actually taken there during the Stargate program. And when I normally talk about it, it's like serious, intense, like incoherence. Of a military barrel determined, likewise not limited to, and the mind's eye thing about it. And way international. But in any case, memory minus the factor of being like 35 became like a phenomenally huge thing in my mind. Geographically attaching some idea of Brazoria being like 1990. Even the movie Right Stuff, or like, what would be like NASA and the color-coded space shuttle, but yet the movie The Right Stuff, and then 90-degree right angle, and Angleton being like the county seat of like Brazoria, and like the movie of the astronauts being like The Right Stuff, and now it's kind of like Highway 59, and 59 being like stuff, and tent, and all the stuff in analytical and linguistic analyticals. It seems to be like right now all this information, and like really I'm in a tent inside my own home, inside the cathedral ceiling, normally where my drums are. I'm working on getting another one right now, but I'm not going off into that right now, other than being a Pearl Vision VSX like Strata Blue, and ultimately at a minimum of 35 pieces, including everything: cymbals, hardware, special effects, percussion, rototoms, octobons, rocket toms. Hopefully Pearl will have the ice blue. I really like the ice blue that like Chaos has. I'm not thrilled about Chaos at all. If that hadn't already happened yet, I sure don't want it to happen again. Is why I'm kind of like slow about getting it, but it's like the only thing it's showing is available. But I really like that transparent ice blue. For real. It would go like excellent with like the Pearl Vision VSX Strata Blue, and I really want that ice blue. Yeah, so I'm kind of hoping that Pearl Vision will get the rocket toms. Exactly like that ice blue, and be a Pearl rocket ice blue, like transparent. Rocket toms, because like all like what is considered either a decabon or octobon. Pearl calls theirs rocket toms, and they're all 6 inches in diameter, but the length is what is the factor in the acoustic sound. And Pearl does theirs in 3-inch increments in lengths, and it being like from like I think it's 10 to 13, then 15, 18, and 21 are the 4 increments, being 3-inch increments in between each one. And Pearl was the only one that I knew of that actually did that at the beginning, but actually Australia is presenting them on like eBay with 3-inch increments. I actually tried to get someone else to actually special purchase them with 4-inch increments. And I'm assuming that because no one would do that for me, and it would be way beyond cost effective, that it wouldn't be within some idea of like harmonic tune in coordination with the size and the shell, and based upon the tonal quality, reverberation, and all that stuff between attack and decay and reverberation inside the drum shell, that it probably would be not made available because it's probably not harmonic within practical range. It would be maybe anything special beyond and be different yet within the spectrum of like harmonics and tonal quality that way. So I'm assuming that's why I was hearing a lot of, no, you don't need to do that. But the 3-inch seems to be, something that was only available in 2-inch increments, and Pearl seems to be the only one in Chaos right now, the only two that I know of that are presenting it with that 3-inch increment. But I'm going to try and get that ice blue, and hopefully Pearl will actually have it, the Rocket Tom in the transparent ice blue, to go with my, yay, all right, yeah, Pearl Vision VSX, yeah, Strata Blue, all right, yeah, double bass, yeah, get it going on, yeah. And I'm going to get all the pasty Color Sound 900 in the blue, and hopefully like with all the blue chromium, not flashing, not an issue of like sweat, penetrating some idea of flashing and creating that ungodly, like, no, please, not corrosion. I mean, cleaning and wiping the sweat off, the way, most drummers practice, like you see and hear on YouTube. Normally at one time during, practicing, the practice makes perfect. Normally would probably ought to be an automatic, at least an all day, at least once a week. I'm sure that in most people's was ultimately like day and night for 3 days and nights non-stop as often as possible. And like I'm sure that virtually everything I listen to is probably had been that much as far as like practice makes perfect goes. But anyway, so like, that sweat being a factor, even with sweatbands and, being a drummer, it just like getting all over the drums. Cleaning it, keeping it dry and all that. It's like, not fun and really not cool. So, so that's like a real big deal about, having, the solid, chromium not affected by as too thin for like, and, flashing being presented as, not even considered cosmetic. Yeah, so like, anyway, so like, hopefully I can get like all the hardware, the arms, the mounts, the cymbal stands, everything, hardware with the blue chromium. Not flashing at all, not going to be affected by sweat or anything about it. So I'm looking for that to get all that with the Pearl Vision VSX in the Strata Blue with the Pearl, the pasty Color Sound 900 in the blue. I'm going to go all blue with it, yeah. So anyway, yeah, so like I was wanting to include that because, and I've deviated once again, but okay, like getting back to like Paul McCartney and the Wings, and someone's knocking at the door, somebody's ringing a bell, do me a favor, open the door, and it presents all the family law and the family structure, and it's referring to like relation within a family, and then it presents it as maybe sounding like would be like a placement in structure as family, as antigen. It's really, the one word involving, like amyloidosis, as an internal factor as compared to the immunoglobulin, and how exposure in turn affecting the bone marrow, like in turn affecting the immunoglobulin, ultimately an overabundant amount of white blood cells being produced, creating a restriction in circulation, a blockage. Ultimately, even the practical principle and practical application, I don't know if I'd call it that, like that, but like Safari browser presents the same similarities. It's like the Safari browser presents itself, it's like it has its own server providing itself with its own cookies, and it's like filling up all the internal storage, all of it, and it's blocking it, and it's starting to like block out the functions and modes of even being able to identify it as a click to move it to an SD card. It's like it disappears. It's kind of like, you gotta be kidding me. It's like it blocks the normal functions of an operating system that has like standard features. It's like click iconic buttons for like moving internal storage to an SD card. As a memory file, a normal, not big deal at all, becomes like a phenomenon, like so not cool. And it's like really, that's really the way it is with like amyloidosis in the white blood cell, filling up, all the internal storage, and it slowly blocks it and accessing any dissipating factor to relieve and regain any normal functioning. It minimizes to the extent, beyond, even being able to move. Seriously, just rolling over in bed, it's almost like an issue of massive heart attack. The congestion inside the blood vessels is so blocked and filled with white blood cells. I mean, it's so seriously not funny. I mean, even, you know, sitting up in bed, moving, and that's when really something about procrastination, not contemplation, complacent is the word. You know, I knew it and what the definition for complacent is, but during knowing that, and still, you know, it's a meeting diagnosis through ER as congestive heart failure, and I got really irritated about a cardiologist trying to convince me of that crap, because it was really amyloidosis. That's really what the deal is, okay? So, like, anyway, it got to the point of complacent and you know, having amyloidosis as some idea, and then being prescribed medication that actually causes what they were admitting as the diagnosis of congestive heart failure was really the medication they were prescribing. Okay, me in the ER already knew there was an issue of, you know, circulation, and automatically, just because I knew what was going on with my parents both having cancer, heparin being a blood thinner, I mean, it was automatic. Hey, get the heparin, you know, I already know. And I mean, you know, it was like a 4 or 5 day and night drip of heparin. I mean, ready, good to go. I mean, it's like it disintegrates and any like congestive thing about white blood cells, and it flushes it out, and like, hey, I'm good to go. All right. I mean, like, I already knew that. Okay, that was my first request. Is, you know, hey, where's the heparin? There's a restriction in blood flow causing, you know, a respiratory issue. I mean, I already knew that. Okay, so that's what they did. Okay, yet they were like presenting it as congestive heart failure, and I mean, that wasn't it at all. Okay. And I wasn't going to sit there and argue with an experienced, you know, cardiologist, and an experienced cardiologist talking that way, and anyone not knowing the difference would ultimately be the idea of maybe knowing and not saying anything, knowing that I'm being thoroughly, like, being insulted, or maybe the thought of maybe some immediate surrounding area based upon perception of him even saying something like that would maybe I don't know if it would be considered an excuse, whatever. I mean, I know what I was hearing, and I knew what I was deciding, you know, that automatically it was heparin and a restriction in blood flow, ultimately being amyloidosis, and really was. And, you know, heparin, I mean, automatically it's like it dissipated all, you know, the congestive, like, white blood cells, I mean, jam-packed in my blood vessels, and every, like, place in my body, and any normal function, even, you know, in places like involved in circulation, like, you know, hey, normally it would be like, good to see you, and have that boing, yeah, so, and all that good stuff, okay? But the thing is that, you know, ultimately, you know, not realizing what exposure is, and it should be like the first thing a person, you know, all that talk about ED, erectile dysfunction and all that, you know, what it really is seemed to be exposure to low voltage. And the real issue is seemingly the white blood cell, and what seemed to be, you know, the idea of, like, you know, white blood cells being cooked inside, you know, capillary tubes, presenting like what would be the similarities of a permanent blockage affecting like a guy's erection, okay? Or some controlled substance. Some premeditated Native American Indian rain dancer in the salt flats is like, hey man, you know, had it been that themselves, yeah, it would have really been good seeing you, you know, but hey, are you kidding me? A premeditated Native American Indian in salt flats, that's what it looks like. Hey, that's really what it looks like. Like, it's really been good seeing you. Yeah, and yeah, that's what it looks like over there. Yeah, so like anyway, okay, so like yeah, so like anyway, yeah, so like that should be probably, you know, all that talk about ED and erectile dysfunction is really, in my mind, you know, some idea like amyloidosis and a serious need of heparin. I mean, at a minimum. Yeah, for real. And all that talk about endocrinology, you know, and the pituitary gland, you know, all that's good. But it seemed to be an issue of what access only means to, like, you know, Paul McCartney, do me a favor, open the door, little man. It seemed to be, you know, what is that? The key to the city? Or is it really like somebody changing what's on the menu, like, while I'm not looking, and go, you know, wherever it is, and come back and discover that medication has been switched and changed within walking distance, okay? It's really what I'm saying, okay? So in any case, okay, so, and likewise, the thing about, you know, good breathing, getting the air clean, and not having to combat some, you know, allergists presenting some idea of what a dietitian only means, and canine units. I mean, or is it really the deep restriction of Dr. Pepper or the 23 ingredients of Dr. Pepper, and the 23-year anniversary celebration, or the thing about, the 23 being the W, and ultimately Fox 29 News and the W television of the W is really a V and a V applied in proper English numerical composition, the P being visible and pronounced, and the P being visible and silent, and the principle of the R between county and the country is really what the issue is involving the kernel and television programming and the language of Ajax. It seems to be the difference between day and night of like what Univision seems to be really involving beyond maritime law, of like leaving the neighborhood and the bank and getting all amphibious and all J. Edgar Hoover about it, or at least at a minimum at a national level, and getting real serious about like getting a commercial venue of living quarters not affected by television programming, and even going beyond the IEEE and Alpha America 24 and the big other organization being a 0 and 240 votes as a minimum of a commercial venue of appliances, and what the split phase is between some idea between the split phase being the thing about some transition between residential to commercial of living quarters, and not the issue being affected by television programming as a deed restriction, making great beyond maritime law of internet protocol of local area networks. That's really what I'm talking about. My name is Wade. I'm in Pearland. I'm about getting a commercial venue all about like audio production, music video, and concerts and touring and all that stuff, and being some like phenomenally like what I like doing anyway, involving being a drummer and singer and getting to my original music and writing some real serious songs, and not be some idea of like what only lifespans means, like if anyone knows what intellectual property only means in the form of royalties, or some like idea of non-taxable income as supplemental security income, or the similarities given as a prepaid tax of an IRA involving the 1040EZ form, yet the similarities of a prepaid tax giving the same impression of a refund, yet still gives the impression of the same similarities of non-taxable income, of some supplemental security income, and likewise in addition goes on and on. Ultimately, even they reach the statute and the VPN, Alpha America 52, ultimately even Fox 29 News and all the proper English numerical composition between W television really being a VP and a VP, and the real issue is seemingly between like Ulysses S. Grant and the name itself of like a student loan combined with a Pell Grant, presenting the real issue in real estate and the monetary and domestic side of like whether appreciation and depreciation is only a thought of like the who knows anyway form. And so I thought I'd mention that because so like what's all that who knows anyway form about? I mean, is it really about a vice president or a vice president twin brother only as a publisher? Or don't tell me it's subversion or a forfeiture based upon maybe who knows anyway, or some intellectual duration of lifespan of what the real information at degree level only means is reputable standards. What consensual participation might only mean is maybe ethnic background. It's a Freddie Prinze tickle stick and some like idea that McDonald's Golden Arches representing some Bluebird American Express card, and some idea of ethnic background, and McDonald's Golden Arches as compared to the half cycle above and below of oscillation, representing some idea of similarities of compatibility in the electronic schematic fish, and once again the misappropriation allocation. Misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi being some like phenomenally big deal about an affirmative fallopian tube, and what relation really is, and in between the architecture and platform, or the idea of like making a grade maybe beyond the operator or equator, and would only represent the issue of like one cycle per second in oscillation, and what the center line really looks like of oscillation at a 9 degree would be like center point energy being used as region 0. And really has been, and that's really what's been going on. And I've had center point energy removed. I had 2 of them. My father, I'm at the same location my father set up. Actually, this is a location since really like December of like 1978, and this being the year 2025. And what was previously, my father actually having center point energy as a business and a residential is no longer. I had them removed because being on supplemental security income, it presented the issue of being overbilled and no one making sense in any kind of way has ultimately led to an issue of like the Bureau of Vital Statistics and Citizenship and Birthrights, and even the birth certificate or carbon footprint and absentee voting. Yet it presents the Region 1 issue or the Region 0 issue. Yet Texas and Mexico Power presents not a question of citizenship and birth rights as Region 1, the United States and Canada, as compared to Region 0, would even include Region 2 is the Eurodollar, yet at the same time, I mean, in my mind, it's like automatically supposed to, involving the acronyms equating to 24, being the Homeowners Association as HOA and GMAC of General Motors, Acceptance Corporation, GMAC being 24, and the IEE of the International Electronic Engineering being 24. And ultimately, it seemed to be the distinction difference of the split phase and the transition somewhere in my mind. It seemed to be, you know, the similarities of transitioning from a neighborhood and residential into a commercial venue, using some idea of like a domestically clause access as like an easement of like J. Edgar Hoover being amphibious that way, of split phase going from like, you know, 120 to 240, which is really 240. It's like, you know, the IEE being 24 and the big O, normally the word organization, but the O looking like a 0 being 240, is really the idea of the exact fact of a commercial venue living quarter at a minimum of the appliance, and ultimately not affected by television programming or deed restriction or television programming, and going beyond the thought of like even W television being the thought of like Ulysses as Grant, and the proper numerical composition of two V's as a W being two V's and VP and VP, and all that proper numerical composition and all that, you know, between the county and the country stuff. Philadelphia, Fox News, Fox 29 News, Philadelphia, and Elton John. It seemed to be all that information. There seemed to be a little bit of humor, not humor at all, really. You know, I heard it in a better bubble. Echo Boost, teleprompting, speed eater, laser beam, oh ho, up in the jazz. And now it's kind of like the Paul McCartney and Wings song about someone's knocking at the door, somebody's ringing a bell, presenting all that family structure as antigen. Yet it's the word involving like amyloidosis, the red and white blood cell. And it seemed to be the connectivity, even the Sarbanes and Oxley, financial instruments of SOX compliance. A whole bunch of information, which seemed to be, you know, some ideas seemed to be even the Wilson Phillips song over and over, and something about falling like a wing. And the Safari browser presenting, you know, that commercial, what would be maybe like would be presented as maybe remote drone pilots for the Safari. Actually, laser beams as sting operations, not limited to the bank lobby. My thing about the Chevy Chase movie, Best Defense in a Laser, isn't really about a sting operation. I mean, to me, it's automatically Chevy Chase and that capability of like satellites orbiting even the International Space Station, projecting an identical twin rainbow of that capacity from outer space, orbiting the Earth as International like Space Station, or, you know, international idea of like reconnaissance and surveillance, and really and still on an international space station, like an identical twin rainbow in Fort Stockton, Texas, and automatically it's like that movie in my mind. Although it presents that red laser beam, this seems to be the thing about remote drone pilots involving like security cameras and laser as a sting operation, even out in the field. Yeah, about a laser, anything other than what you see. What you're seeing like on me now and behind me, like I'm inside this tent. It's like some laser lighting with 3D animation and like different patterns and automation as a preset. Some of them are sound activated depending on the decibel range or frequency and consistency, presenting a constant as automation, not necessarily an at random sequence involving, you know, decibel range. But all that's like, you know, all that happens whenever it does. But that's what you're seeing right now as far as like lighting and special effects. The lasers I'm talking about involving like a sting operation, it's like the real cool, not like issue about perception about getting like not funny burn. More so maybe what would be thought, maybe not really my thought of like, you know, lighting effects for like music video and like entertainment. I don't consider sting operations like entertainment, but it seemed to be like really, it's like I mentioned before, I'm not sure if I can distinguish the difference between a State of the Union address and We International. Yeah, it seemed to be a thing about it, so anyway, not funny. So like would you stop it, okay? Yeah, so like chases everywhere you want to be. Are you sure? It's kind of like, it kind of looked like Wells Fargo's like everywhere I was going. Are you sure you're not really referring chases everywhere you're going because it's really Wells Fargo? Wells Fargo's everywhere you're going. It's because like being baptized during the gold rush, on a stagecoach. And a bunch of clams and like Pearl Vision, and Calamity Jane like on the Pony Express, all the ohms resistance of the horseshoe and Calamity Jane and prepaid postage, alright, so like, it seemed to be like really, I mean for real, being baptized during the gold rush and Elton John Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, I mean for real, Wells Fargo, being baptized during the gold rush and on the stagecoach, I mean, automatically, I mean, seemed to be like the real deal about Wells Fargo, somewhere between Wyatt Earp and John Wayne, I mean for real. Including the clam and Calamity Jane and all that stuff, I mean, for real. Seemed to be the real deal about, American intelligence, the U.S. dollar, and the Treasury that way. Involving the Delta Force and the electronic schematic symbols of triangle on the power square being a 6-point star. Alphabet's 138, and like a telepathic angel. The current president in the year 2025, Donald Trump. Alphabet's 138, Donald Trump, So it's ultimately a 6-point star in my mind. Seemed to be the thing about the Star of David, the Star of Israel, the Israeli flag. And, horizontal parameters as compared to vertical, what would be like the absolute issues are like going through like algebra on through calculus on into quantum. The absolute dollar of like a international import and exporting of like, New York Stock Exchange. And similarities of movements between monetary, domestic, and gross national product. And if you read the book, I mean, like Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, you'll see the similarities in practical application of the movements that involve the U.S. dollar and gross national product and exchange, and the similarities of like monetary, domestic, and gross national product, like 3 movements. It's like it's all planned. And like everyone is like using phenomenally mega hundreds of millions of dollars and placing it and making, I mean, millions in hours on the interest alone. And everyone's planned it and it's all set up and they've got it, okay? And they use it. And it's just like sitting there getting like, interest on that amount of money. It's like, everyone's like almost ready to retire in a week. I mean, for real. God, it's unreal. So, I mean, they present it, and it seems to be the similarities of, like, the book, Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, and the principles that are in the book, likewise, Turbulent Waters, and even Nimitz class. I mean, it presents the sets of 3, even Mercedes-Benz, of the movements of monetary, domestic, and gross national product of the aggregates, and actually the movements that are really involved with, like, importing and exporting in the New York Stock Exchange, and, investment terminology of human capital, distinguishing difference, some idea like of, a deed restriction of, just K-television, and being like in any neighborhood, even a 9-hole golf course, having K-television, and not realize what a deed restriction is, or a level of economics that would even suggest anything other than a neighborhood as residential, and not the grade. I mean, like whether you're degreed or not, or consider yourself like, a millionaire or not, really. It's almost like in my mind still not the grade, or at that level, or, or like really participation of what a real circuit is, not affected by K-television, or even the thought of a PG-13 rating of like, Fox 29 News in Philadelphia seems to be, I mean, the location of the United States, about, the big W being the big, V2 and the VP and the VP, and the proper English numerical composition, and, it seemed to be like Philadelphia, Fox 29 News, I mean, it seems to be, I mean, like it's it, involving all that, including the kernel and Ajax language of ultimately even Univision. Now, how true it is about Univision, I'm not sure. But somewhere in Geneva, Switzerland, somewhere in my mind, involving, Fox 29 News, it really presents in my mind. Even Elton John's song, and it seems to be like even Paul McCartney, and it's like it presents information in such an analytical way. I mean, a person could listen to it and listen to it, I mean, every day. I mean, all day, all night, and not even realize an analytical just being presented of available information. I mean, it's like insignificant, and I'm like looking at like everything, and it seems to be that significance now of even like Paul McCartney and the Wings, and what's presented as like family structure. The word antigen is also like the pronunciation of like involving amyloidosis and what is normally perceived normally of oncology and cancer treatment. It's really doesn't have to be that. I mean, like at all. Yet it presents the issue of like the immune system and the white blood cells, really what the deal is about, the immunoglobulin and that thing about antigen. And I'll actually have to decide if I'm going to actually confirm, you know, the information, but I was getting two different viewpoints that I'm not thrilled about having viewpoints in a way that seem to be anything other than its intended use, you know, and it's really kind of frustrating sometimes. I mean, if it's really only a degree level or reputable standards of what real degree lifespan means and like royalties based on just having access to available information, sometimes, I mean, it's so not cool not having the automatic degreed experience of like the degree terminology and definition and its intended use, and it's not a question or, you know, figuring it out kind of like thing. Yeah, so like, you know, somehow in my mind it seems to be involving international law of having fair use of easements, involving royalties or just the information itself, as the degree of representative participation, and like getting every benefit of like knowing the real information, and not the question of, you know, some accusation of, you know, neglect based upon lack of experience or just, you know, guessing by process of elimination. Anyway, it's already gone like an hour and 6 minutes, and I wouldn't include that much about it right now, but it seemed to be, you know, the Elton John thing and the Paul McCartney and Wings and the Wilson Phillips song over and over, and the Falling Like a Wing and like the Safari browser and the similarities and all that with like that information. So like, yeah, all right. So you know what? I'm gonna take a break, okay? So like, there it is, okay?